Mom, starting tomorrow. These are your new responsibilities in this house. Can you even imagine hearing those words from your own daughter? My daughter, Renata, didn't ask. She ordered me to be her live-in domestic worker, right here in the home I'd worked 40 years to buy. And if I didn't agree? You can pack your things and leave, she said, her voice like ice. It was a moment that shattered everything I thought I knew about family. I stood there, a crumpled piece of paper shaking in my trembling hands. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a work schedule. My own daughter was handing me a list of chores, a timetable for my servitude, as if I were a new hire, not her mother. And then Gustavo, her husband, piped up from the couch without even glancing up from his phone. And obviously, all this includes paying for the house expenses. That's what your pension is for. I was in my own living room. The very same living room where I'd held Renata as a tiny baby 34 years ago. Where I'd celebrated her birthdays, where I'd comforted her through her first heartbreaks. Now that same child looked at me with a coldness that seeped into my very bones, chilling me to my core. The list went on and on, hour by painful hour. 6 a.m. breakfast. 7 a.m. get the kids dressed for school. 8 a.m. general house cleaning. 9 a.m. laundry. 10 a.m. lunch prep. It continued relentlessly, until 11 p.m. when I was supposed to be ironing clothes for the next day. It wasn't just a schedule. It was a blueprint for my total disappearance, for my transformation into a shadow in my own home. You don't have much time to decide, Mom, Renata continued, casually painting her nails a bright, sickening pink. Gustavo has already spoken with the lawyer. Since we've been living here for over 2 years and maintaining the house, we have rights. So you can be our employee and stay, or you can leave and we'll stay anyway. The threat hung heavy in the air, clear as day. In my own house, with the deed firmly in my name, my daughter was blackmailing me. Either I became their personal servant, paying all the bills and working myself to the bone, or I'd be kicked out so they could take everything I owned. I mean, the sheer audacity. Think it over, she said, blowing gently on her freshly painted nails. At your age, where else are you going to find a place to live on a $600 pension? At least here you have a roof and food, and you can see your grandkids every day. Unless, of course, you prefer to live alone in some miserable little room. Gustavo let out a cruel, chilling laugh. Besides, honey, let's be realistic. What else are you going to do with your life? At least this way you'll feel useful. It's better than watching TV all day like old ladies your age do. My grandchildren were playing on the floor, tablets clutched in their hands, completely oblivious to the conversation that was tearing my world apart. 8-year-old Ethan looked up at me for a moment, his innocent eyes wide, and asked, "Grandma, are you going to make snacks?" "I'm hungry." It was the cruelest kind of normal. To them, I was already the housekeeper, the person who fixes things, cleans, cooks, serves. Not the grandma who loved them unconditionally. Not the woman who had worked 40 grueling years to buy this very house. Just the free servant, always available. Always. "Look, Mom." Renata stood and placed a condescending hand on my shoulder. A gesture that felt less like comfort and more like ownership. "It's not that we don't love you. We love you very much. That's why we're giving you the opportunity to stay. But things have to change. This house needs order. And someone has to be responsible for keeping everything running. And why does that someone have to be me?" I managed to whisper, finding my voice for the first time in what felt like an eternity. "Because you're the one who doesn't work," Gustavo replied, his eyes still glued to his phone. "We work, we study, we have real responsibilities. You just collect your pension and don't do anything productive." It felt like a physical blow, a slap across the face. 40 years working as a secretary in a government office. 40 years getting up at 5 in the morning, taking 2 buses just to get to work. Saving every single penny to buy this house. 40 years raising Renata alone after her father abandoned us when she was just 3 years old. Don't do anything productive? I repeated, the words catching in my throat, choking me. All these years maintaining this house, paying the bills, buying your food, taking care of your children while you go out, washing your clothes, cleaning up your messes. That's not work, Mom. Renata interrupted me with that sickeningly condescending smile I had learned to hate. That's what anyone living in a house does. The difference is that now it's going to be organized with fixed schedules, so everything runs smoother. I looked around my living room, my gaze sweeping over the familiar, yet now alien space. The furniture I had bought with so much sacrifice, with so many dreams, was utterly ruined. My beautiful leather sofa, which had taken me 2 years to pay off, was covered in food stains and tears from when the kids jumped on it without anyone correcting them. The wooden coffee table, which had once been my pride and joy, was now covered in marks from glasses and hot plates that no one bothered to put on coasters. On the walls, my cherished family photos had been replaced by movie posters Gustavo liked. My precious book collection had been relegated to a dusty box in the garage, all to make space for the video games and electronic gadgets they constantly bought with the money I gave them. Besides, Renata continued, examining her nails with a sickening satisfaction, this is going to be good for you. It's going to give you purpose. Lately you've seemed very depressed, very bored. Having clear responsibilities will help you feel better about yourself. The manipulation was so blatant, so obvious it physically hurt. She was selling me my own slavery as if it were a favor they were doing me, as if becoming their free servant was some form of therapy for my emotional well-being. It was insulting. And you have to work on weekends too, Gustavo added, finally looking up from his phone, his eyes still lazy. Saturdays are for deep house cleaning, and Sundays are for preparing the week's meals. It's not that we're being cruel to you, honey. It's just that we need things to run like a real home. Like a real home? I repeated, anger finally beginning to replace the shock and the hurt. This isn't a real home. This is the house I bought, that I maintained, where I welcomed you when you had nowhere to live. Yes, but now we're a family, Renata replied with that twisted logic that left me utterly speechless. And in a family everyone has their role. Ours is to work and earn income. Yours is to keep the house running. It's fair. 6-year-old Valerie approached, tugging at my skirt. Grandma, can I have cookies? The ones on top of the fridge. I looked at her, and I saw in her innocent eyes the same expectation I had seen in her mother's when she was her age. The expectation that Grandma always says yes, always fixes things, always available. But now that expectation came with an official schedule, an unsigned contract, and implicit threat. In a moment, my love, I told her, gently caressing her head. No, Renata interrupted sharply. Valerie, your grandma is going to follow a new schedule. If you want something, you have to ask her at the right time. It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon now, and according to the schedule, this is her snack prep time anyway. I walked to the kitchen, my legs trembling, feeling as if each step led me deeper into an abyss from which I didn't know if I could escape. The schedule remained in my hand, crumpled by the pressure of my fingers. It was like holding my own emotional death sentence. When I opened the pantry, I realized how incredibly empty it was. 3 broken cookies at the bottom of a package, an expired can of tuna, and half a bag of rice. In the refrigerator, the situation wasn't much better. 2 yogurts Renata had bought for herself, one of Gustavo's beers, and the leftovers from a 3-day-old dinner that no one else had wanted to eat. Grandma, there are no cookies, Valerie shouted from the living room with that impatience she had learned from her mother. I'm coming, my love, I replied, knowing perfectly well that I would have to improvise with what little there was, or rather, with what little they had left me to have in my own kitchen. I heard Renata's footsteps approaching. Her heels echoed with an authority they hadn't had in this house before. It was as if the simple act of having handed me that paper had transformed her into the official owner of everything. Mom, while you're in the kitchen, I wanted to remind you that you need to go to the supermarket early tomorrow. I made a list of everything we need, she said, sticking a paper on the refrigerator door. It's about $150 worth of groceries. Oh, and you also need to stop by the pharmacy to pick up the kids' vitamins and Gustavo's special shampoo. $150. A quarter of my monthly pension. For a week's worth of groceries for a family that had decided my money was theirs by right. Renata, my pension doesn't stretch that far every week, I managed to say, though my voice sounded strangely small in my own kitchen. Oh, Mom, always the same, she sighed dramatically. You know, Gustavo is saving to buy us our own house. We can't be spending our income on food and basic necessities. Besides, you eat here every day. It's normal for you to contribute to the expenses. The logic was so twisted it made me dizzy. Gustavo was saving for his own house while living rent-free in mine. He ate my food and used my services. And I, the real owner of the property, had to pay for the privilege of being their free domestic worker. And what if I don't have enough money? I asked, though I already knew what her answer would be. Then you'll have to adjust and buy the basics first. The children need to eat well. Mom, you can't be selfish with money when there are little ones in the house. Selfish with my own money in my own house. The word stabbed me like a dagger in the chest. Gustavo appeared at the kitchen entrance, stretching as if he had just woken from a nap. It was 4:30 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, and he was in his pajamas watching television while I took care of everything else. Honey, could you prepare something good for dinner? It was a tough day at work today, he said, opening the refrigerator and pulling out a beer as if it were the most natural thing in the world. A tough day? I couldn't help but ask, my voice laced with disbelief. I thought you hadn't left all morning. I work from home on Tuesdays, he replied with a tone that made it clear I had no right to question his schedule. Virtual meetings, important calls. It's very stressful. That's why I need to relax when I'm done. I looked at the clock. 4:30 in the afternoon. If he had worked from home, his workday had lasted exactly 3 hours, considering I had seen him sleeping on the couch at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Besides, he continued, taking a long swig of his beer, Renata and I were talking about some additional rules to make the house run smoother. For example, we need you to respect our downtime. When we're in the living room watching television, it would be better if you didn't interrupt with cleaning or cooking noises. But the schedule says I have to cook at this time, I replied, holding up the paper still in my hand. Yes, but without making noise, or you can cook earlier when we're not resting. It's a matter of better organization. The contradiction was absurd. I had to cook at fixed times, but without disturbing their rest periods, which apparently covered most of the day. I had to follow strict rules that changed at their convenience. Renata returned to the kitchen with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was that smile she had perfected since adolescence, the one she used when she wanted something or when she was about to say something particularly hurtful, disguised as concern. Mom, I also wanted to talk to you about your room, she said, leaning against the counter as if she owned the place. Gustavo and I think it would be better if you moved to the small room in the back. We need the master bedroom because it's bigger and we have more things. The master bedroom. My master bedroom. The room where I had slept for 30 years. Where I had cried after my husband's death. Where I had dreamed of watching my grandchildren grow up in a loving environment. Now they wanted to relegate me to the tiny service room, literally. That room is very small, Renata, I said, feeling my voice crack. There's barely enough room for a twin bed. It's perfect for you, Mom. You don't need much space. Anyway, and that way we can have a bigger closet for our clothes and the kids' stuff. It's more practical for everyone. More practical for everyone. That was the mantra that justified every humiliation, every loss of dignity, every step towards my conversion into a shadow in my own life. Besides, Gustavo added, the small room is closer to the kitchen. It'll be easier for you to get up early to prepare breakfast without disturbing anyone. Of course, my new location in the house had been calculated to maximize my usefulness as a domestic worker. Close to the kitchen to serve better, far from the main living area so as not to bother the true inhabitants of the house. And when do I have to move? I asked, though I already knew I had no real choice. This weekend would be perfect, Renata replied cheerfully, as if we were planning a vacation. Gustavo can help you move the heavy things. Well, the few things you need to take. Most of the furniture in the master bedroom we're going to use ourselves. The furniture I had bought, the solid wood dresser, which had been my first purchase when I got my first job. The vanity with a mirror where I had gotten ready for my wedding. The marital bed where I had conceived Renata. All of that would now be theirs because it was more practical. Ethan ran into the kitchen with his tablet in his hands and an urgent expression. Grandma, my battery died and I need the charger. Where is it? In my room, honey. Go get it, I said automatically. No, Renata intervened firmly. Ethan, you can't go into your grandma's room without permission. She'll bring you the charger when she finishes preparing snack. The humiliation was complete. Now, not even my grandson could freely enter my room. But Renata and Gustavo could decide when and how I should move, what furniture I could keep, and which room I was allowed to live in. And one more thing, Mom, Renata continued, as if it were an endless list of new restrictions. Sundays are our family day. Gustavo and I want to spend quality time with the kids, so it would be better if you plan to go out on those days. You can go to the park, visit a friend, whatever you want. We just need space to be a family. Sundays. My family day too. The day I had reserved for years to do special activities with my grandchildren, to cook together, to watch movies cuddled on the couch. Now it was the day I became an intruder in my own home. And where am I supposed to go every Sunday? I asked, feeling tears well up in my eyes. I don't know, Mom. You surely have friends. You can go for a walk, go to church. There are many things a person your age can do. The important thing is that you have your own activities, that you don't depend so much on us for entertainment. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling that would soon no longer be mine, thinking about how I had reached this point. At what moment had I stopped being the mother and become the servant? When had I lost the right to have an opinion in my own home? I remembered when Renata arrived with Gustavo and the children. 2 years ago, they had lost their apartment because Gustavo had lost his previous job. They arrived with tears in their eyes, hugging me and promising it would only be for a few months while they recovered financially. You're our salvation, Mom, Renata had told me that first night. I don't know what we'd do without you. You're the best mother in the world. The first few weeks had been almost pleasant. It was wonderful to have the house full of life again, to hear the children's laughter running through the hallways that had been silent since my husband died. Renata helped me with the cooking. Gustavo helped with some minor repairs, and the little ones filled my heart with their spontaneous hugs. But gradually, so slowly that I didn't realize it until it was too late, things began to change. First, it was Renata asking me to watch the children while she went job hunting. Then it was Gustavo expecting me to prepare dinner because he was too tired from his job interviews. Afterward, it became natural for me to pay for groceries because after all, we all eat here. Every favor I did became an expectation. Every gesture of love transformed into an obligation. Every time I said no problem to a request, I was signing my own emotional servitude. At 3 o'clock in the morning, I heard noises in the kitchen. I quietly got up and walked down the hallway, finding Gustavo serving himself cereal directly from the box, leaving crumbs all over the countertop that I had cleaned before going to bed. Gustavo, is everything okay? I whispered so as not to wake the children. He looked at me startled, as if he had been caught doing something wrong. Yes, I was just hungry. It's nothing. But tomorrow there will be cereal in the bowl for the children, I said, seeing that the box was almost empty. Oh honey, don't be dramatic. It's just cereal. You can buy more tomorrow, he replied, leaving the empty box on the countertop and heading back to his room. My room. I stood there in the dark, cleaning up the crumbs he had left, realizing that this was my life now, cleaning up their messes in silence at 3 o'clock in the morning while he slept in my bed without the slightest concern for the consequences of his actions. On Friday morning, as I prepared breakfast, according to my new official schedule, Renata came downstairs with an energy I hadn't seen in months. She was wearing a red dress I didn't recognize and shoes that cost more than my week's worth of groceries. Mom, I need you to watch the kids all weekend, she announced as she poured coffee into my favorite mug. The one with little painted flowers that my husband had given me on our 5th anniversary. Gustavo and I are going on a couples retreat at the downtown hotel. We need to reconnect after all this stress. A couples retreat, I repeated, unable to hide my surprise. And with what money? Oh, Mom, always thinking about money, she replied with that artificial laugh she had perfected. Gustavo got a bonus at work. We deserve a break after everything we've been through. A bonus. Gustavo, who worked 3 hours a day from home, had received a bonus. But somehow that money wasn't enough to buy cereal or contribute to household expenses. It was only enough for luxury hotels and romantic retreats. And the kids will be okay with me all weekend? I asked, though I already knew my opinion didn't matter. Of course they will. You're their grandma. It's natural for you to take care of them. Besides, according to your new schedule, Weekends are designated for activities with them, she said, checking her phone as she spoke. It was true. In my servitude schedule, weekends were marked as intensive childcare and deep house cleaning time. Apparently, my rest didn't exist in their concept of family organization. Renata, we need to talk, I said, feeling something break inside me. This can't go on. She looked up from her phone with an expression of genuine surprise, as if she couldn't understand why I was protesting against my obviously reasonable fate. Talk about what, Mom? Your negative attitude lately? Because yes, I've noticed you're very grumpy. Maybe you should see a doctor at your age. It's normal to have hormonal changes that affect your mood. Hormonal changes. My indignation at the abuse was a medical problem I needed to solve. My resistance to humiliation was a symptom of my advanced age that required professional treatment. I'm not sick, Renata. I'm tired of being treated like an employee in my own home, I said, surprising myself with my own clarity. Employee, she repeated, putting on an offended expression that would have won an Oscar. Mom, how can you say that? We're family. What happens is that in a family, each person has responsibilities. Ours are to work and generate income. Yours is to keep the house running. It's that simple. And why do my responsibilities include paying all the expenses and working 24 hours a day? I asked, feeling my voice tremble but grow stronger. Mom, no one asked you to work 24 hours. The schedule we gave you is very reasonable. You have free time between activities. You can rest, watch television, do whatever you want in your free time. I looked at the schedule taped to the refrigerator. The free time it mentioned were 30-minute intervals between tasks. Enough to go to the bathroom or get a glass of water, but not enough to truly rest. And the money, why do I have to pay for everything if you have income? I insisted. Because we are saving for our future, Mom. We can't be spending our money on current expenses when we have long-term goals. You've already lived your life. You've had your opportunity to save and plan. Now it's our turn. The logic was devastating in its cruelty. According to their reasoning, I had already had my chance to live, and now my role was to finance and facilitate their opportunities. My pension earned with 40 years of work was less important than their long-term goals. Gustavo appeared in the kitchen, already dressed to leave, with a smile that I found increasingly repulsive. He approached Renata and kissed her on the cheek, a gesture of possession and complicity that completely excluded me. All set for the weekend? He asked her, completely ignoring me, though I was standing less than 3 feet away. Yes, my love. I've explained everything to Mom. She'll take care of the kids in the house, Renata replied as if I were just another object she had arranged for their absence. Perfect, honey. Just one more thing, Gustavo said, finally addressing me. On Monday, my mother is coming to visit us for a few days. She'll need the guest room, so it would be good if you have it spotless. She also likes breakfast very early, around 6 o'clock in the morning. I hope it's not a problem. His mother. Another person I would have to attend to, feed, and serve in my own home. Another mouth to feed with my money. Another person who would expect my services as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And how long is she staying? I asked, though I already sensed I wouldn't like the answer. We don't know exactly. It depends on how she feels. Lately, she's been very lonely since my father died, so we thought being with family would do her good, he replied. As if my house were a free hotel for people in need of company. Gustavo, your mother and I don't get along very well, I said, remembering the few times I had met her and her dismissive attitude towards me. Oh honey, those are past problems. You have to learn to forgive and forget. Besides, she's an elderly lady. She needs care and attention. I'm sure that when you get to know her better, you'll get along very well. Care and attention that, of course, I would provide without remuneration or recognition, while Renata and Gustavo enjoyed their romantic retreat. I would be serving breakfast at 6 o'clock in the morning to a woman who considered me inferior. And Mom, Renata added, putting on the earrings that completed her outfit. When your mother-in-law arrives, it would be good if you give her the master bedroom. We can sleep in the children's room for a few days. She needs to be comfortable. The master bedroom, which they had already taken from me, now they were going to give to Gustavo's mother. I, in my own house, would occupy the smallest room while a complete stranger slept in my bed, used my furniture, and expected my services. The weekend became a nightmare that surpassed all my darkest expectations. Renata and Gustavo left on Friday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon after leaving me an additional list of instructions for childcare that included specific times for meals, educational activities, limited screen time, and strict sleep routines. "It's important that you maintain discipline, Mom," Renata had told me before getting into the taxi I had paid for to the downtown hotel. "Children need structure. If you spoil them this weekend, it will be very difficult for them to respect us again afterwards." Ethan and Valerie looked at me with expectation, waiting for me to fulfill the role of entertainer, cook, teacher, and babysitter all at the same time. It wasn't their fault, of course. They were children adapting to a system where Grandma was the person who solved everything, while their parents enjoyed freedoms I had forgotten existed. On Saturday morning, as I prepared pancakes for breakfast according to the specific nutritional instructions Renata had left, Ethan spilled orange juice on the living room rug. It was a normal accident, the kind of thing that happens when there are children at home. But when I started cleaning, I realized there weren't enough cleaning products. "Grandma, Mom says that when something gets stained, you have to clean it immediately or it gets ruined forever," Valerie informed me with the seriousness of a professional supervisor. She was right. Renata had been very specific about keeping the house spotless during their absence. So, at 9 in the morning on Saturday, I found myself walking to the supermarket with the two children, spending $30 of my pension on cleaning products for a disaster that could have been solved with soap and water. At the supermarket, Ethan asked for the special cereal his father ate, the one that cost $8 a box. Valerie wanted the organic cookies her mother bought her, the ones in the $10 package. I looked at the prices and made desperate mental calculations, knowing that every dollar I spent was $1 less for my own needs. "Why are you taking so long to decide, Grandma?" Ethan asked impatiently while I compared prices of laundry detergent. "I'm just seeing which one is better, my love," I lied, not wanting to explain to an 8-year-old that his grandma had to choose between buying food for him or medicine for herself. When we got home, there was a message from Renata on my phone. "Mom, I hope you bought fresh vegetables for the week. When we get back on Sunday, we need the house to be perfect and the kitchen full. We don't want to arrive at an empty house after our relaxing trip." Fresh vegetables, another $50 I hadn't budgeted for, another 2 hours walking with the children because the taxi money would have to be used for food, another afternoon of my weekend dedicated to serving the needs of people who were enjoying a luxury hotel with the money they had saved thanks to my free services. On Sunday afternoon, as I cleaned the house from top to bottom for Renata and Gustavo's triumphant arrival, I received a call that would change everything. It was Lucy, my neighbor of 15 years, the only person who truly knew my situation, although I had never openly spoken about it. "Honey, are you okay? You've seemed very strange lately," she said with that warm voice that reminded me what it was like to have a conversation without timers or to-do lists. "Yes, I'm fine," I lied automatically as I folded Gustavo's clothes that I had washed and ironed over the weekend. "No, you're not okay. I see you leaving very early every morning as if you're rushing somewhere. And I see you coming home with supermarket bags almost every day. What's going on in your house?" she insisted with that gentle persistence that characterized true friends. For a moment I was tempted to hang up. It was easier to keep pretending that everything was normal, that it was natural for a 66-year-old woman to live like a housekeeper in her own home. But something in Lucy's voice broke me. "Lucy, can you come over for a moment? I need to talk to someone," I said, surprising myself with my own honesty. "I'm on my way," she replied without asking questions. When Lucy arrived, the children were watching television in the living room, completely absorbed in their shows. We sat in the kitchen, surrounded by the perfect order I had created for their parents' arrival. And for the first time in months, I told someone the truth about my life. I showed her the schedule. I explained about the money. I told her about the threat of being kicked out of my own house if I didn't agree to be their free employee. I told her about the small room, about the family exclusion Sundays, about Gustavo's mother, who would come to be served by me in my own bed. Lucy listened in silence with an expression that went from surprise to horror. and finally to the purest indignation I had seen in a long time. "Honey, this is abuse," she said finally with a clarity that hit me like a slap of reality. "This is not normal. This is not what a family who loves you does. But they say it's fair that in a family everyone has their role." I began to repeat the words I had heard so many times. "No," she interrupted with a firmness that surprised me. "In a functional family, roles are discussed and mutually agreed upon. No one imposes an unpaid work schedule on anyone. No one threatens to kick anyone out of their own home. That's not love, honey. That's exploitation." The word hung in the air between us. Exploitation. It wasn't family dysfunction. It wasn't a generational misunderstanding. It wasn't my inability to adapt to modern times. It was pure and simple exploitation. "But what can I do?" I asked, feeling the tears finally find their way after months of being held back. "They're right about one thing. At my age with my pension, where else am I going to go? Who else is going to want me?" "Honey, look at me," Lucy said, taking my hands in hers. "You are 66 years old, not 96. You own your own home, have a stable pension, and as far as I know, you have all your mental faculties perfectly clear. You don't need anyone to support you. They are the ones who need you." It was such a simple and revolutionary perspective that it left me speechless. For so long I had assumed that I was the lucky one to have a place to live, that I had forgotten that the place was mine. I had assumed that I was the beneficiary of their generosity when in reality they were the beneficiaries of mine. "Besides," Lucy continued, "do you really think this is going to get better over time? Do you think one day they're going to wake up and decide to treat you with respect? Honey, this is going to get worse. Every limit you allow them to cross will become the new minimum standard for how they treat you." She was right. The schedule hadn't appeared overnight. It had been the result of 2 years of gradual erosion of my dignity, of small concessions that had become expectations, of favors that had transformed into obligations. "What would you do in my place?" I asked her, though I already knew the real question was whether I would have the courage to do what I knew was right. "I'd kick them out of my house tomorrow," she replied without hesitation. "And if you don't have the courage to do that yet, at least start setting boundaries, charging for your services, demanding respect in your own home, reminding them who really owns all of this." We heard the sound of a car arriving. Renata and Gustavo had returned from their romantic retreat, tanned and relaxed, ready to resume the routine where I was their personal employee, and they were my benevolent bosses. "Honey," Lucy told me before she left, "if you need to talk, if you need help, if you need someone to remind you that you deserve to be treated with dignity, call me day or night. And think about this. If a domestic worker worked the hours you work and paid for the privilege of working, how long do you think they would last in that job?" The question haunted me as Renata and Gustavo entered the house, critically checking if I had met all their expectations during their absence. It haunted me as they complained that there was no milk in the refrigerator, and that I hadn't bought enough new towels for Gustavo's mother's visit. That night, lying in my bed, which would soon no longer be mine, I began to ask myself for the first time in a long time what would happen if I simply said no. Monday morning arrived like a perfect storm of humiliations. At 5:30 in the morning, the doorbell woke me with its shrill sound. It was Marissa, Gustavo's mother, standing at my door with 2 enormous suitcases and the expression of someone expecting to be received like a queen. "Finally," she said without even greeting me, pushing her suitcases inside the house. "The taxi took forever. I hope Gustavo explained my special breakfast needs to you. I have a very delicate stomach and can't eat just anything." It was 5:45 in the morning. I hadn't even had time to brush my teeth or comb my hair. But there I was, receiving instructions about the special gastronomic needs of a woman who had invited herself to my house indefinitely. "Good morning, Marissa," I managed to say, though my voice sounded hoarse from interrupted sleep. "Gustavo told me you were coming." "But yes, it's good that everything is settled," she interrupted me, looking around my house with a critical eye. "Although I see that this place needs some adjustments. Where is my room? I'm very tired from the trip." My room. The master bedroom that had already been taken from me, and that would now be hers during her indefinite stay. I led her down the hallway carrying one of her suitcases that weighed as if it had rocks inside while she commented on every aspect of my decor that she disliked. "This rug is very worn," she said, pointing to the Persian rug that had been my pride for years. "And these curtains are too dark. At my age, I need a lot of natural light. You'll have to change them tomorrow." Change the curtains with my money, of course, to make my own room more comfortable for an uninvited guest who had no departure date. When we reached the master bedroom, Marissa inspected everything like a general reviewing troops. She opened and closed drawers. She evaluated the mattress by sitting on it with different levels of force and finally declared, "This will do. Although, I need you to wash all the sheets with hypoallergenic detergent. I can't sleep in beds that aren't spotless." Hypoallergenic detergent. Another unplanned purchase. Another expense that would come out of my already stretched pension. At 6 o'clock sharp, as Gustavo had promised, Marissa appeared in the kitchen expecting her special breakfast. She was wearing a silk nightgown and feathered slippers, as if she were the owner of a luxury hotel instead of a guest in my house. "I need 2 scrambled eggs, but very dry, no oil, whole wheat toast, but barely toasted, not burnt, very light coffee, almost like tea, and fresh fruit, but only the perfectly ripe ones." She recited her demands as if it were a menu I should have memorized. I had no eggs. I had no whole wheat bread. I had no fresh fruit because I had spent all my money over the weekend on the children's whims and cleaning products to keep the house perfect for Renata and Gustavo's return. "Marissa, I don't have exactly what you're asking for, but I can prepare something similar," I began to explain. "What do you mean you don't have any?" She interrupted me with an indignation that filled the entire kitchen. "Gustavo didn't tell you what I needed? This is unacceptable. A house without the basic ingredients for a decent breakfast." At that moment, Gustavo appeared in the kitchen, already dressed for work, with that annoyed expression he wore when something interfered with his perfectly organized routine. "What's going on here? Why so much noise so early?" he asked, although it was his mother who had been shouting. "Your housekeeper doesn't have food in the house," Marissa replied, pointing at me as if I were a defective object. "How am I going to have breakfast without the basic ingredients?" Housekeeper. She hadn't even bothered to pretend that I was anything more than that. To her, I was simply the service staff of her son's house, hired to attend to her needs without question. "Honey, didn't you go to the supermarket this weekend?" Gustavo asked me with that reproachful voice he had perfected to make me feel like a punished child. "Yes, I did. But I spent the money on what Renata asked for the children." And I began to explain. "Oh, please," he interrupted me. "You always have excuses. My mother needs to have a proper breakfast. Go to the supermarket now and buy what's needed, and next time plan better. Go to the supermarket at 7 o'clock in the morning. Spend more money. I didn't have to please a woman who treated me like trash in my own house." All this while, Gustavo prepared to go to his 3-hour-a-day job, and Renata continued to sleep peacefully in the children's room. "And with what money?" I asked, feeling something harden inside me. "I already spent everything I had this weekend." "With your pension money, obviously," Gustavo replied as if it were the stupidest question in the world. "That's what you have income for, right? To keep the house running." "My pension is already committed for this month," I said with a firmness that surprised me. "I don't have any more money available for unplanned expenses." The silence that followed was so dense it could be cut with a knife. Gustavo looked at me as if I had blasphemed, and Marissa had the expression of someone who had just witnessed the most incomprehensible rebellion in history. "Are you telling me you can't buy food for my mother?" Gustavo asked, raising his voice with an indignation that would have been comical if it hadn't been so cruel. "I'm telling you, I don't have money available right now," I repeated, keeping my voice as calm as possible. "This is incredible," Marissa exclaimed, addressing her son as if I weren't present. "This is the kind of service the family receives in this house. An employee who refuses to do basic shopping." "Honey, this can't go on," Gustavo said, adopting a tone he would have used to scold a problematic employee. "If you can't fulfill the basic responsibilities of maintaining this house, then perhaps we need to reconsider the living arrangements." There was the veiled but clear threat again. "Do you comply with our demands? Or do you leave your own house?" Do you serve our family without limits? Or do you lose the right to live in the place you yourself bought and paid for? At that moment, Renata appeared in the kitchen, still in her pajamas, but fully awake thanks to the noise of the argument. Her presence immediately changed the dynamic of the conversation, as if she were the manager arriving to resolve a labor dispute. "What's going on here?" she asked, though it was obvious she had been listening from the hallway. "Your mother is refusing to go to the supermarket to buy breakfast for my mom," Gustavo explained to her, as if he were a child reporting another child's bad behavior. "Mom," Renata said with that voice of disappointment she had perfected since adolescence, "is it true that you don't want to buy food for Grandma Marissa?" The manipulation was perfect. They had transformed my resistance to spending money I didn't have into a cruel refusal to feed a needy elderly woman. They had turned my attempt to set basic financial boundaries into an inexcusable act of selfishness. "It's not that I don't want to," I explained, feeling myself defending against accusations I shouldn't have to refute. "It's that I've already spent all my money for this month, and I don't have any budget left for additional purchases." "Oh, Mom, always exaggerating about money." Renata sighed dramatically. "How much can breakfast cost? $10? $15? Don't tell me you don't have $1 to feed your family. $15 that would become $30 tomorrow, $45 the day after tomorrow. A constant drain on my pension to keep comfortable a woman who openly despised me. Besides," Gustavo added, "my mother won't be here forever. It's only temporary while she adjusts to being alone. Can't you make this small sacrifice for the family?" Temporary. The same word they had used when they arrived 2 years ago for a stay of a few months. The same empty promise they had used to justify every new invasion of my space, every new demand on my time, every new hole in my budget. "And how long is Marissa going to stay?" I asked, though I already knew I wouldn't like the answer. "We don't know exactly," Gustavo replied vaguely. "It depends on how she feels, whether she finds activities she likes in the neighborhood, whether she adapts well to the house routine." "The house routine?" "My routine of serving, cleaning, cooking, and paying for the privilege of doing so. The routine where I was the free domestic worker for a family that had decided my house was theirs by right." At that moment, as I stood in my own kitchen, being scolded for not wanting to spend my pension on the whims of a woman who treated me like trash, something definitively broke inside me. It wasn't a dramatic moment of enlightenment. It was more like when a dam breaks. First a small crack, then a constant flow, and finally an unstoppable avalanche of clarity. "Okay," I said with a calm that surprised even myself. "I'll go to the supermarket and buy what Marissa needs for her breakfast." Everyone seemed to relax immediately, as if my surrender had restored the natural order of the universe, where I obeyed without questioning. But there was something different in my voice. Something none of them detected because they were too used to assuming my submission. "Perfect, Mom," Renata said with that condescending smile she reserved for when I came to my senses. "I knew you'd understand in the end how important it is to make Grandma Marissa feel welcome." I quickly dressed and left for the supermarket. But this time I didn't go straight to the food section. This time I first went to the pharmacy in the shopping center where I knew there was an ATM, not to withdraw money for Marissa's breakfast, but for something completely different. I withdrew $200 from my savings account, money I had been saving for emergencies. But I realized this was the biggest emergency of all. The emergency of recovering my dignity before it was too late. With the money in my wallet, I walked to a lawyer's office I had seen advertised in the local newspaper. It was early, barely 8:30 in the morning, but the receptionist informed me that attorney David Miller handled emergency consultations from 9 o'clock. "Is it an emergency?" the receptionist asked me, a young woman with a kind smile. "Yes," I replied without hesitation. "I think it is." David Miller turned out to be a man in his 50s with a neatly trimmed beard and eyes that conveyed the kind of experience that comes from having seen all kinds of complicated family situations. "Tell me what's going on, Mrs. Everett." He began consulting the card where I had written my name. "Mrs. Everett," I said, and for the first time in a long time, I pronounced my name with something akin to pride. "Attorney, I need to know what my rights are in my own home." I explained the entire situation, the work schedule, the threats to evict me from my property, the financial exploitation, Marissa's arrival without my consent. I spoke for 20 minutes without stopping, as if I were a dam that had finally broken. David listened without interrupting, taking occasional notes and nodding with expressions that ranged from surprise to indignation. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and looked at me with a mixture of compassion and professional determination. "Mrs. Everett, what you are describing constitutes economic and emotional abuse," he said with a clarity that hit me like a lightning bolt. "Your daughter and son-in-law are committing what is legally known as elder exploitation. But they have rights for having lived in the house for 2 years?" I asked, remembering Gustavo's threats about consulting a lawyer. "In some cases, after a certain period, occupants can claim tenant rights," he explained. "But those rights never include the right to exploit the owner or to impose unpaid work conditions on them. And they definitely do not include the right to bring additional guests without the owner's consent." I felt as if a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. For the first time in months, someone was confirming that my perception of reality was correct, that I wasn't being dramatic or ungrateful. "What can I do?" I asked, though for the first time in a long time, the question came with hope instead of desperation. "Several things," he replied, consulting his notes. "First, you can notify them in writing that you are terminating any informal housing agreement you had. Second, you can establish clear limits on the use of your property and your financial resources. Third, you can request that unauthorized guests vacate the property immediately." "And what if they refuse?" I asked, thinking about my family's reactions when they received those notifications. "Then we have several legal options, including eviction orders and reports of elder abuse. But my experience tells me that when families realize that the elderly person is legally advised and knows their rights, they usually reconsider their behavior very quickly." David explained that he could draft a legal letter that same day, setting new terms for anyone who wanted to continue living in my house. Terms that included paying market rate rent, contributing equally to household expenses, and absolute respect for my authority as the owner. "How much does this type of consultation cost?" I asked, fearing it would be more money than I could afford. "For elder abuse cases, we have special rates," he said with a reassuring smile. $100 for the initial consultation, and $200 for drafting the necessary legal notifications. If the case becomes complicated and we need to go to court, we can discuss a payment plan. $300. What I spent in 2 weeks maintaining my family, what Renata and Gustavo had spent in a single night of their romantic retreat. For the first time in a long time, it seemed like money very well spent. "Attorney Miller, I want you to draft those letters today," I said, taking the money from my wallet with hands that no longer trembled. "Excellent decision, Mrs. Everett. These letters will be ready this afternoon. Do you want me to deliver them personally to your family, or do you prefer to do it yourself?" "Myself," I replied without hesitation. "I think it's time I had an honest conversation with my family." When I left the lawyer's office, I felt like a completely different person. It wasn't that I had suddenly regained all my confidence, but for the first time in months I had a plan. I had professional support. I had legal rights that no one could take away with threats or emotional manipulation. But before returning home, I had one more stop to make. I went to the bank and spoke with the manager about changing the access codes to my accounts and setting strict limits on who could make transactions on my behalf. "Have you had problems with unauthorized access to your accounts?" the manager asked me, an efficient woman who seemed to immediately understand the situation. "Let's just say I want to make sure only I can handle my money from now on," I replied. "Very sensible," she told me while processing the changes. "Do you also want to review who has authorization to use your credit cards?" Excellent question. Renata had been using my credit card for months for emergencies that were never reimbursed. It was time for those emergencies to become other people's responsibility. "I want to cancel all additional authorizations," I said firmly. "Only I will have access to my accounts and cards." When I finally returned home, it was almost 11 o'clock in the morning. 4 hours had passed since I had supposedly left to buy Marissa's breakfast, and I was returning empty-handed, but with something much more valuable, an action plan and the legal support needed to execute it. Gustavo had already gone to work, but Renata and Marissa were in the living room, clearly annoyed by my delay. The children were at school, which meant we would have privacy for the conversation I was about to have. Finally, Marissa exclaimed upon seeing me enter. "Where have you been? It's almost 11 o'clock and I haven't had anything to eat." "And where's the food?" Renata asked, noticing I wasn't carrying any grocery bags. "We need to talk," I said, keeping my voice calm but firm. "All three of us right now." Something in my tone must have alerted them because both fell silent, looking at me with a mixture of surprise and caution they hadn't shown in a long time. "Sit down," I said, pointing to the sofa. "This conversation is going to change a lot of things in this house. I've been at a lawyer's office." I began watching their expressions go from irritation to alarm in a matter of seconds. "And I've learned some very interesting things about my rights as the owner of this house." The silence that followed was deafening. Renata looked at me with that expression she wore when she was a child and was caught doing something she knew was wrong. Marissa, for her part, seemed genuinely confused, as if she couldn't understand why a housekeeper would be consulting lawyers. "Mom, what are you doing?" Renata asked with a voice that tried to sound concerned but couldn't hide the panic. "Why did you go to see a lawyer without telling us anything?" "Because I wanted to understand exactly what my legal situation is in my own home," I replied, keeping my voice serene. "And it turns out it's very different from what you've led me to believe." I took out the documents David had prepared in record time, 3 letters with official letterhead addressed respectively to Renata, Gustavo, and Marissa. The weight of the paper in my hands felt like the weight of my own dignity being restored. "These are legal notifications," I continued, placing the documents on the coffee table. "You can read them now or you can wait for me to formally deliver them to you this afternoon, but the content is the same." Renata immediately stood up and took her letter, reading it with a speed that revealed her desperation to understand how serious the situation was. Marissa took hers with trembling hands while I watched her expression of superiority gradually transform into shock. "This is ridiculous," Renata exclaimed after barely reading the first page. "You can't kick us out of the house. We're your family." "I'm not kicking you out," I replied with a calm that surprised me. "I'm offering you the opportunity to stay under new conditions, fair and legal conditions." Renata's letter clearly stated the new rules. If she wanted to continue living in my house, she would have to pay $800 a month in rent, contribute half of all household expenses, and respect my authority as the owner and my right to privacy in my own room. $800, she shouted, waving the paper as if it were a cruel joke. "Mom, you know we don't have that kind of money." "Then maybe it's time you looked for a real job," I replied, using the same condescending tone she had perfected for speaking to me. "Or maybe it's time you found a place you can afford with your own income." Marissa had finished reading her letter and was looking at me as if I had completely lost my mind. Her notification was simpler. She had 48 hours to vacate the property as her presence had not been authorized by the owner. "You can't do this," she stammered, her voice breaking with indignation. "I'm an old woman. You can't kick me out on the street like a criminal." "I'm not kicking you out on the street," I replied firmly. "I'm asking you to return to your own home or to find accommodation in a place where you are a welcome guest, not an imposed burden." "Gustavo won't allow this," she threatened, getting up from the sofa with more energy than she had shown since her arrival. "He will defend his mother." "Gustavo can defend his mother in your house," I said, pointing towards the door. "This is my house, and my rules are respected here." Renata had remained silent, reading and rereading the letter as if she expected the words to magically change. When she finally looked up, there were tears in her eyes, but not the kind of genuine sadness. They were the calculated tears she had used since childhood to manipulate situations in her favor. "Mom, how can you do this to us?" she whimpered with a voice that tried to sound devastated. "We love you. We just wanted us to be a united family, and this is how you pay us back? You threaten us with lawyers." "A united family doesn't work with work schedules for one of its members," I replied, standing firm against her performance. "A united family doesn't threaten its members with kicking them out of their own home if they don't agree to be free domestic workers." We never threatened to kick you out, she protested, though both of us knew that was exactly what they had done. Renata, I have the list you gave me, I said, taking the crumpled schedule from my purse. At the end it clearly says that if I don't agree with these conditions, you understand that I prefer to find another place to live. What do you call that? She was speechless for a moment, clearly looking for some way to reinterpret her own written words. Finally, she opted to change strategy. Okay, maybe we were too strict with the schedule, she admitted, adopting a conciliatory tone. We can change that. We can be more flexible. You don't need to bring lawyers to solve family problems. The problem isn't just the schedule, Renata, I said, feeling stronger with each word. The problem is that you have turned me into your unpaid housekeeper. The problem is that you spend my pension as if it were yours. The problem is that you invite people into my house without my permission and expect me to attend to them. Marissa, who had been listening to our discussion with increasing agitation, finally exploded. This is crazy. Gustavo told me he lived with a loving family. He didn't tell me he would live with a crazy old woman who thinks her house is a hotel. Precisely, I replied, looking directly into her eyes. This is not a hotel. It is my house. And in my house, guests are invited, not imposed. But I am Gustavo's mother, she shouted, as if that gave her automatic rights over my property. And I am the owner of this house, I retorted with a firmness I didn't know I possessed. Your family relationship with Gustavo does not give you rights over my home. Renata had been silently calculating, probably doing math on how much it would actually cost them to live independently. When she spoke again, her voice had a desperate tone I had never heard from her. Mom, let's be realistic, she said, trying to sound rational. We can't pay $800 in rent plus household expenses. You know that. And you can't live alone at your age either. We need each other. I've lived alone before, I replied. I lived alone for 10 years after your father died, before you arrived. And I lived very well, thank you very much. But now you're older, she insisted, playing the age card as a last resort. What are you going to do if you get sick? What are you going to do if you need help? I'll hire professional help if I need it, I said. An idea that had just occurred to me but sounded perfectly sensible. There are many services for seniors that charge for their services and provide them with respect and professionalism. Are you going to pay strangers instead of accepting help from your family? She asked as if the idea were personally offensive. I'm going to pay for professional services instead of being exploited by people who take advantage of my love for them, I corrected. There's a very important difference. At that moment the phone rang. It was Gustavo, probably calling to check that his mother had been properly attended to during his absence. Renata ran to answer, speaking in urgent whispers that clearly communicated that a family crisis was unfolding. While she spoke, Marissa approached me with an expression that had changed from indignation to something akin to respect. It was the first time she had looked at me as if I were a real person instead of a talking piece of furniture. Honey, she said with a considerably softer voice, maybe we can reach some arrangement. I don't have to stay in the master bedroom. Can I sleep on the sofa? Oh, Marissa, I interrupted her gently. The problem isn't where you sleep. The problem is that you came to my house without my invitation, expecting to be treated like an honored guest indefinitely. That's not fair to either of us. Gustavo arrived home 20 minutes after Renata's call with an expression I had never seen before. It wasn't his usual condescending arrogance. It was something much more dangerous. It was the face of a man who realized that his parasitic world was about to collapse. Honey, we need to talk, he said with a controlled voice that didn't fool me at all. Renata told me about these ridiculous letters you brought from some charlatan lawyer. Attorney David Miller is not a charlatan, I replied calmly. He is a lawyer specializing in landlord-tenant rights and elder protection. And these letters are not ridiculous. They are perfectly valid legal notifications. This is a betrayal, he exploded, dropping all pretense of diplomacy. After everything we've done for you, after keeping you company so you wouldn't be alone, after turning this empty house into a home full of life, the distortion of reality was so extreme that it almost made me laugh. According to their version of events, They had been doing me a favor by coming to live rent-free in my house, eating my food, using my services, and spending my money. Gustavo, you are 42 years old, I said with a patience that was hard to maintain. If you want to live in a house full of life, you can buy your own house and fill it with all the life you want. But not at my expense. We've been saving to buy our house, he shouted as if that justified 2 years of exploitation. But it's impossible to save when there are so many expenses. You don't understand how expensive it is to raise 2 children. You're right, I admitted, surprising him with my agreement. I don't understand how expensive it is to raise 2 children because when I raised Renata, I paid all her expenses with my own money. I didn't look for an older person to support me. Marissa, who had been observing the discussion from the sofa, decided to intervene with her version of maternal support. Honey, I understand you're confused, but Gustavo is a good father and a good son. He doesn't deserve to be treated this way by a woman your age who is clearly losing her mind. Losing my mind? I repeated, feeling fury ignite in my chest. For defending your rights in your own home. For threatening your family with lawyers instead of solving problems like civilized adults. Marissa replied with that moral superiority she had perfected over the years. Civilized adults don't impose work schedules on family members. I countered. Civilized adults don't threaten to evict the owner of their own house. Gustavo had been pacing back and forth in the living room, clearly calculating his options. When he stopped, he had that expression he wore when he was about to play his strongest card. Okay, honey, he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. If you want to play with lawyers, we can play with lawyers because it turns out we've also been consulting about our rights. What rights? I asked, though I already suspected where he was going. The rights of tenants who have lived on a property for more than 2 years, he replied triumphantly. The rights of parents who have been raising their children in a stable home. The rights of a family that has been maintaining a property that was deteriorating from lack of care. It was exactly the threat David had warned me they would try to use. The difference was that now I was prepared to face it. Gustavo, I said with a calm that clearly unnerved him, I suggest you show those legal consultations to your real lawyer, because mine assured me that no court in the country would grant tenant rights to people who haven't paid rent and who have been financially exploiting the owner. Gustavo's expression changed immediately. It was obvious that his legal consultations had been internet searches or conversations with friends, not real professional advice. Besides, I continued, pulling out my own ace in the hole, my lawyer informed me that what you have been doing is called elder exploitation and that it is a federal crime. So, if you want to involve more lawyers in this situation, go ahead. But I warn you that the legal consequences for you will be much more serious than for me. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the children who had arrived from school during our discussion and were listening from the hallway remained completely still. You're threatening to sue us? Renata asked with a small voice she hadn't used since she was a teenager. I'm not threatening you with anything, I replied. I'm explaining the legal consequences of your actions. The same consequences my lawyer explained to me this morning. Ethan appeared at the living room entrance with his school backpack still on his shoulders and a confused expression. Why is everyone yelling and why is Grandma crying? Indeed, Marissa had started crying, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of rage and humiliation from someone who realized she had completely lost control of a situation she thought she had mastered. It's okay, my love, I told Ethan, approaching to hug him. The adults are having an important conversation about how we're going to live in this house. Are we leaving the house? Valerie asked, who had appeared behind her brother with wide eyes. My granddaughter's innocent question broke my heart. But it also reminded me why I was doing all this. These children deserve to grow up in an environment where family relationships were based on love and mutual respect, not exploitation and manipulation. That depends on your parents, I replied honestly. If they decide they want to stay here, respecting the house rules and contributing fairly, they can stay. If not, they'll have to find another place to live. What rules? Ethan asked with that direct curiosity children have. Rules like all adults living here have to work and contribute to expenses, I explained. Rules like no one can force other family members to work without rest. Rules like we all deserve to be treated with respect. Gustavo looked at me with an expression that would have been intimidating a week ago, but now seemed simply pathetic. Honey, are you confusing the children with these adult dramas? The children were already confused, I countered. They were confused seeing their grandma being treated like a housekeeper. They were confused hearing their parents talk about kicking their grandma out of her own house. Now at least they're hearing that there's another way to live as a family. Renata approached her children and hugged them in a gesture that would have been tender if it hadn't been clearly calculated to generate pity. Children, go to your room and do your homework. The adults need to finish talking. When the children left, the atmosphere in the living room became even more tense. It was as if we were all waiting for someone to make the next move in a chess game where the rules had completely changed. Okay, Gustavo finally said, adopting a negotiating tone. Let's say you're serious about all this. Let's say you really want us to pay rent and contribute to expenses. How much time do you give us to get organized? The letters specify 30 days. I replied, consulting the documents. 30 days to decide if you accept the new conditions and start complying with them, or 30 days to find another place to live. And my mother? He asked, pointing to Marissa, who was still sobbing on the sofa. Your mother has 48 hours, I said firmly. She has no housing agreement with me, authorized or unauthorized. Her presence here was an imposition, not an invitation. You can't kick an old woman out with only 2 days' notice, Gustavo protested. I can and I will, I replied, surprising myself with my own determination. Your mother has her own home. If she doesn't want to live alone, she can find an appropriate place for people her age, or she can stay with relatives who have actually invited her. 3 months later, I woke up in my own bed in my own room at 7 in the morning because I wanted to, not because a schedule demanded it. The silence of the house didn't bother me. In fact, it was the most beautiful sound I had heard in years. The sound of peace. Marissa had left on the second day, exactly as the legal notice had specified. She left amidst dramatic tears and threats of never speaking to me again, as if that were a loss and not a blessing. Gustavo had to borrow money from his siblings to pay for a hotel, while she decided what to do with her life. In the end, she chose to move into a senior living apartment where, I later heard, she constantly complained that the staff wasn't as efficient as I had been. Renata and Gustavo had tried all sorts of tactics during those first 30 days. First came total denial. They insisted that everything was a misunderstanding, that they could resolve things as a family without lawyers involved. When that didn't work, they tried emotional guilt. They constantly reminded me that I was missing the opportunity to see my grandchildren grow up, as if seeing them grow up required me to be their unpaid 24-hour babysitter. Then came anger. Gustavo yelled for 2 hours one night, calling me selfish, cruel, a bad mother, and an even worse grandma. Renata cried, begged me, hugged me, and even brought the children to ask me to change my mind. But for the first time in years I stood firm. David had prepared me for each of these tactics, and I had calm, legal answers for all their overflowing emotions. The children are going to suffer because of you, Renata had told me during one of her last attempts at manipulation. The children are going to learn that healthy family relationships are based on mutual respect, not exploitation. I had replied using the exact words David had suggested. The final phase had been the most revealing. During the last week before they left, both Renata and Gustavo had started treating me with an exaggerated courtesy that was almost more insulting than their previous abuses. Suddenly, I was Mrs. Everett and please, and thank you very much for everything. It was as if they had suddenly remembered that good manners existed, but only when they needed them for something. Mom, we hope you understand that we always loved you, Renata had told me the morning they left. It's just that sometimes families have misunderstandings. Misunderstandings. 2 years of systematic exploitation reduced to a simple misunderstanding. As if it had been a confusion about who should take out the trash and not a deliberate campaign to turn me into their free housekeeper. But they were gone. They moved into a 2-bedroom apartment on the other side of town, a place that cost exactly $800 a month in rent plus expenses. Apparently, when it came to paying an unfamiliar landlord, they did have the money. Only when it came to paying me, their family, was their money not enough. The first few days after their departure had been strange. The house felt enormously empty after 2 years of being filled with constant noise, urgent demands, and the perpetual stress of serving other people. But gradually, that feeling of emptiness had transformed into something completely different. Freedom. I could have breakfast when I wanted. I could watch the television shows I liked. I could decide what to cook based on my own cravings, not on the nutritional demands of 4 different people. I could spend my pension on my own needs and even treat myself to small luxuries I had forgotten existed. The first time I bought fresh flowers for my dining room table, I started crying right there in the supermarket. They were $15 that would have previously gone to special cereals or hypoallergenic shampoo for uninvited guests. Now they were $15 I could spend on something that made me happy for the simple pleasure of making myself happy. Lucy had been a blessing throughout the entire process. Not only had she helped me maintain my resolve during the most difficult moments, but she had become a true friend. Now we had lunch together twice a week, went to the farmer's market on Saturday mornings, and had started taking painting classes at the community center. "Don't you miss the noise of the children?" she had asked me one afternoon while we painted watercolor landscapes. "I miss my grandchildren," I had replied honestly, "but I don't miss being their unpaid babysitter. There's a very big difference." And it was true. Ethan and Valerie visited me every other Saturday, an arrangement we had established after many tense negotiations. At first, Renata had tried to use the visits as a form of pressure, suggesting that if I didn't give in on some aspect of the separation agreement, the visits could become more complicated to coordinate. David had advised me to keep all communications about visits in writing, and through him until Renata realized she couldn't use her own children as emotional blackmail weapons. Eventually, we had reached a civilized agreement. The children came every other Saturday from 10 o'clock in the morning to 6 o'clock in the evening, and I took them to do fun activities I could afford now that I wasn't subsidizing the lifestyle of 4 adults. The difference in my relationship with Ethan and Valerie was remarkable. When I wasn't responsible for them 24 hours a day, when I didn't have to worry about their mealtimes, their discipline, and their constant entertainment, I could simply be their grandma. I could spoil them a little, laugh with them, listen to their school stories without being distracted thinking about what household chore I had to do next. "Grandma, why don't you live with us anymore?" Valerie had asked me during one of her first visits. "Because adults need their own spaces to be happy," I had explained. "Your mom and dad need their own home where they can make their own decisions, and I need my own home where I can make mine." "But you still love us," she had insisted with that genuine concern that broke my heart. "I love you more than anything in the world," I had assured her, hugging her tightly. "And precisely because I love you so much, I want you to learn that people who love each other treat each other with respect and affection. They don't take advantage of each other." Ethan, who was older and more observant, had understood the situation surprisingly maturely. "Mom and Dad made you work a lot, didn't they, Grandma?" "Yes, my love," I had admitted. "But now we're all learning better ways to be a family." That morning, 3 months after the big change, I woke up with a feeling I had completely forgotten. Positive expectation, not anxiety about what demands would await me during the day, but genuine curiosity about what good things I could choose to do. David had called me the previous week to inform me that Renata and Gustavo had officially withdrawn any legal claims to my property. Apparently, their consultations with real lawyers had confirmed what I already knew. They had no legal rights over my house, and any attempt to establish such rights would only result in charges of elder exploitation. "How does freedom feel, Mrs. Everett?" David had asked me with that warm smile I had come to appreciate so much. "It feels like waking up from a very long nightmare," I had replied. "It feels like remembering that I am a person, not an object." That morning I got up when I wanted, had breakfast what I wanted, and dressed to go to my new favorite activity, senior dance classes I had discovered at the community center. At 66, I was learning to salsa. I had made new friends and was rediscovering parts of myself I had forgotten existed. As I prepared to leave, I looked at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The woman who looked back at me no longer had that perpetually tired and anxious expression she had worn for the past 2 years. Her eyes were bright, her back straight, and she had something she had lost without realizing it. She had dignity. As I left the house, I locked the door and walked to the bus with firm steps. It was my house, my life, my decision. And for the first time in a very long time, those words didn't scare me. They filled me with pride because I had learned the most important lesson of my life. It's never too late to reclaim your self-respect. And once you reclaim it, no one can take it away from you again. No matter how much you love them or how much they love you, true love, I had discovered, never requires you to sacrifice your dignity. And true family never asks you to become less than you are so they can be more. If you enjoyed my story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can write more stories like this. Thanks a lot in advance. What about you? What would you do in this person's shoes? I'd really love to hear your thoughts, so drop them in the comments. I'm always curious to know what you think. Oh, and let me know where you've heard this story. If you want to hear more life stories like this, like the video and subscribe to my channel. There are many more waiting for you. Big hugs and see you next time.